Okay, hi everyone. Welcome today to our Q&A for the Shorts Program North. I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Smith. I'm one of the programming committee members for imagineNATIVE this year. I'll give some visual descriptors. So I'm a light-skinned woman with brown hair. I'm wearing a colorful sweater and beaded earrings. Behind me is a shelf with books and art and plants on it. And I just like to say I'm coming to you from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg. Really grateful to be able to be on my homelands while I'm at imagineNATIVE, which is a new experience, or I guess a second-year experience, but a newish experience. So what I'd like to do is just invite each of the filmmakers to introduce themselves. And again, if you could give that visual description, that would be wonderful. So why don't we start with Nicola?
Yes, hello, thank you for hosting this. My name is Nicolas Renaud. I'm from the Huron-Wendat First Nation of Wendake, near Quebec City, but I'm speaking to you from my home in Montreal. I have the short film Metamorphosis in the program. As for description, I'm a man of mixed ancestry, and I have glasses, and I'm speaking in front of a blue screen, a green screen background of fall color leaves.
Great. And Woodrow, would you mind going next?
Woodrow. How are you? My name is Woodrow. Pronouns are he, him. Descriptors are I'm white passing, light skinned native. I have a brown hair beard and short brown hair. I'm currently in Port Townsend, Washington, as part of a Centrum residency here, which is within the Jamestown S'Klallam tribe, but I work and I live in Portland, Oregon. I am a Klamath, Modoc, and Cherokee descendant, and grateful to be here.
Great, thank you. And Neil.
Hi, I'm Neil Tinkham, pronouns he, him. Light-skinned, half American, half Chamorro, Pacific Islander. I am currently in Los Angeles, and I am in my bedroom. There's not much to see. Yeah, it's pretty empty. And I just did the short film Tahasui Manina, which follows a Chamorro cultural organization as they create a in-language chant. And pleasure to be here. That's it.
Thank you. And Lindsay, thanks for joining. And we got started a little bit without you, but if you could just introduce yourself and give visual descriptor of yourself and your background.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry about the weirdness of connecting. I had trouble getting on. It wanted me to administer the meeting. So my apologies for being a little bit late. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Mcintyre. I am Inuk on my mom's side and settler Scottish on my dad's side. I have brown hair and brown eyes, and my hair is in two pigtails. I'm sitting in front of, I'm also wearing some amazing earrings from Lookin' Sharp by Baby made of caribou antler. And I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf and a very large drawing of my dog, and really happy to be here. I made the film Ajihini Looked Out Tugut, which translates to We Are All Different. The animation, it's an animation with stop motion bears.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone. Welcome. So I'm just going to jump right in. I guess maybe quickly I'll just say to the audience that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll add them into the questions that we're going to be asking throughout the talk. So this program's was North, but we were thinking about the ideas of transference of knowledge. So transference of knowledge between the ages and spanning cultures. Today we have, all of you here working with this program, or whose work was in this program. And one of the continuing themes that we noticed was transference of practice, Indigenous activism, mobilization, and continuums, as well as notions in relation to time and context. And I just wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about that idea of transference, but not necessarily just these straight lines of how we transfer knowledge, but the ways that they come in various forms through film and through yourselves. So if you could answer that, that would be great. If you need clarity, please let me know. I feel like I said maybe a lot of extra words in there as well. And oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess I'm maybe making this a bit confusing. I apologize. My brain just stopped after I asked my question. But maybe what I'll actually do is make this a little more clear. I very much apologize. Is I'm going to ask some direct questions about that theme to each of you. I apologize about that. So sorry, I'm going to start with Neil. Your film really captured the essence of community that was truly heartwarming during these times. And what was the process like of producing and coordinating rehearsals over Zoom, especially when it came to sound?
Yeah, so it was a lot of filming and trying to figure out how to do it right, because this was a process that took over several months. And so this organization that normally meets in person couldn't, and so they wanted to find a way to continue their mission, and so they decided to create an in-language chant, but do this virtually, right? So something that you normally do together, right, as a whole, we all had to figure out how to do separately, right, while everyone was socially isolating. And so this was they did it via Zoom. And so I just recorded that weekly meeting that they had for several months. And the challenge was getting maybe like upwards of like 10 hours of footage and condensing it down to like 5 minutes, and also trying to make the Zoom process like an engaging experience. And so it was really just kind of having an idea of what I wanted at the very beginning, like having a shot list. And then as I was going through the footage, just seeing what I could pull that would, meet those criteria. And then also just kind of, some interesting moments that, I thought kind of would bring the experience to life. So that was kind of the process. The audio was tricky. Fortunately, we had some professional people, like professional audio engineers and things like that, part of the group. And so we were able to kind of figure out, okay, well, when we do the final recording, everyone is still socially isolated. So we're just going to get everyone recording themselves separately on their cell phone, and so it wasn't the cleanest audio, but, we were able to harmonize and everything by just, layering everything together to create, an actual finished product that sounded like we were all together, when in fact everyone was separate in their own home. And so I think the hope is later on they'll be able to get everyone into like a studio or something like that and actually do like proper recording. But this is kind of like a unique like artifact to have, like the original product. So yeah, that's how it was done.
Wow, amazing, thank you. And then Nicola, I wanted to ask about in your film Metamorphosis, it's quite an intimate conversation between two women. And I was wondering how you came to this making this work, thinking about representation, and especially how you were going to present a relationship like this. But then also from the perspective of an Anak living in Quebec.
Yes, thank you. Well, yeah, you point to a conversation between two women, and they are Inuk. Well, Inuit, H is Inuk. So that's saying from the start that the subject is completely foreign to me, which was new, because all my films and my installation work has been about things that are very close to me, that really start from a personal necessity. So Inuit culture is quite different from First Nation cultures, and when that culture, so I was culturally a stranger to an outsider to the subject. I'm not a woman, and as for my main subject, Olivia, I'm not the orphan of a murdered Indigenous woman. So this was all an environment, a subject, all new grounds, things that I felt I was approaching as an outsider. That being said, the quick story I can make about why this came to be, it's first of all a commission gone wrong. I was hired to direct a video about Indigenous youth involved in fighting racism in Montreal. And as it often happens with some organizations and institutions, they give very little, and they want a lot of control to get their share of Indigenous content and a bit of drama. And I felt very uncomfortable and stepped out. But we had started the process. I had met Olivia, and I suggested to her, why don't we make a free impressionist portrait of you, and we continue this process in collaboration. And she said yes. So after that, I had my own personal connection to it, which I think we need anyway for making anything. So the discussion on mixed heritage identity is something that I closely relate to. And there were other things that I could connect to, in how Olivia sees things, how she adapts to things, and sometimes little details that are not obvious for anyone, but for me in the editing, it was clear, like how she talks to animals. She starts the film saying hello to a seal in Nunavik, and then saying hello to an alley cat in Montreal. This way of addressing animals, the way to make important moments in one's life in a ritual, is something I felt very close to. So this was the negotiation of being an outsider to the topic, but having personal connection to aspects of it.
Lindsay, I really enjoyed the stop motion animation and the voiceovers. It was a really in-depth look at the way Inuit people not living in the North feel, and I appreciate how much space was given to explore this. Could you talk a little bit more about the Inuit diaspora and the ways that you connect with your collaborators in the film?
Sure. So the film was made as a commission for the opening of Kamawiak at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, the Inua, the exhibition that's on now there until March. And I had initially intended a completely different film in one sense, but it happened to happen at a time when you couldn't get even two people, like a single other person from outside your own home. You couldn't get together with them. And so the idea, I was interested in listening to Neil's description of creating sound, because a similar thing, but sounds like maybe simpler on my end, happened where we had to record all of the audio in Zoom calls just like this one. So I had a couple of Inuit mentees working with me on the project in a variety of different ways. Jennifer Hopanome was helping with some of the recordings and things, and had some other people helping with the actual animation itself. It's a very, very labor intensive process. So the film took quite a while to do, but was a very different process than we thought it would be. And so but what was wonderful about it was that instead of using a group of Inuit as it was sort of designed to be, which was like semi-scripted, semi-documentary conversation about belonging and Inukness, it ended up being much more extensive. So I had hours and hours of material, of interviews basically with Inuit from across the whole country. And so that was one of the maybe the benefits that came from this, was to be able to connect with people who were really distinctly interested in speaking about this same topic from their perspective. So Inuit who both live in community and outside of community, or have lived in community or have lived outside of community, and the ways in which those things are processed and perceived kind of, internally and then also within community. In reality, obviously, there are Inuit living all over the so-called sort of urban Inuk, and just sort of looking at those kinds of ideas, but connecting those relationships to land and to place and to what it really means to be Inuk. And so it was a really beautiful process that began with the idea of exploring this idea of Tunganaknik, or like the idea of like being welcoming and bringing people in, but it expanded exponentially. It was supposed to be like a 5-minute animation and it's 17 minutes. So it was a really rewarding process to connect with Inuit who were interested in talking about that diaspora.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lindsay. Great. And so Woodrow, thinking about land and place and transition, in your film Faces, Displace, and Other Imaginary Things, I quite enjoyed the merging of the experimental moving image and the histories, ideas of movement, and of course the histories of Indigenous labor in the Pacific Northwest. Could you speak about your use of words from the historic film as a strategy to further your concept?
Yeah. When I came across the archival footage, it was kind of far into my process. And so the film kind of started, like, I thought I was going to be making a simple remapping project that was going to be very personal and kind of ask all these questions around routes and maps tied to personal memories. And then just through research, it started expanding, and then I came across that archival footage. And when I first saw it and heard the words, like, I've read papers where they talk about the goals of the state to utilize like Indigenous people themselves to work. It's not working together, but utilizing their own labor and their abilities to accomplish the goals of the state. And so, but to hear that propaganda language and to actually hear it versus just reading it, or I've heard it in contexts to other communities, it was pretty haunting. And so I kind of wanted to include it, one because the speaker isn't seen in the videos, and so a lot of it is the workers who are in these labor projects. And so to include the words was kind of to contextualize it within this propaganda center, but also while seeing the workers, including the other personal footage and memories, to kind of also then remember the autonomy of the workers and the other Indigenous people who were a part of it, and all the complicated questions and things they must have been working through and thinking through, and what we deal with today, in our own experiences dealing with these external forces, and so kind of using it not really not really trying to dive into it as like this like purely good or bad thing, but kind of just like all these these different memories and issues that people are confronted with when the material circumstances change at the times and what you need to address. And so, yeah, kind of hearing propaganda footage, like hearing the voices in this video was something that kind of like shifted the project for me, and so I wanted to include it.
So yeah, I find it really interesting that all four of you have talked about sort of adaptability and having to change for various reasons. But I was hoping that, you know, we could talk a little bit more about what it meant to enter into a project a certain way, and then for that to have shifted, or even just having to adapt because of circumstances of how you could make the film based on you know, the circumstances we've all been living through over the last almost 2 years, and just how those shifts affect the work and you, and I guess also your expectations of the film. So I'm going to just sort of leave this open, because if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, but if you do, go ahead. And Lindsay, you put your hand up, so go first.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I've made lots of films. I've made 40 short films. And I think in general, as a filmmaker, as a practitioner, because a lot of what I do is process oriented and it's very labor intensive. This film is by no means an exception from that, but it's, I work through failures. Like I think that no matter what you do as a filmmaker, you have to make the film you have. And obviously the circumstances that we encountered over the last and are still encountering now have changed, you know, traditional modes of production in a variety of ways. And I think that you just have to, you know, look at what you have and make the film you have. And so that's sort of, this film is a result of that process. None of it was what I expected it to be in the beginning. But there were a lot of moments of beauty and clarity and additional things that happened that wouldn't have been involved if I didn't, if I hadn't kind of gone through those hardships, or like I was speaking earlier about being able to connect with more people. So I think, I mean, that's just my underlying principle for what I do, but I also think that, you know, embracing failures and figuring out what there is to learn from what has gone wrong, or what didn't work out the way we quite imagined it, is part of, it's just part of filmmaking, I think, or part of making work for other people. And I don't think I ever really have expectations about what the work will do. I make work to process things that I'm dealing with, and or process things that I'm dealing with even in other works. And so the topic of my film, which has a lot to do with the idea of belonging or not belonging, is related to some stories that my grandmother told me, and the content of another bigger film that I'm making about her, but also were things that I experienced when I was living in community, and were just things I wanted to explore, and kind of wanted to do so in maybe more subtle ways than actually exist in the film. But the power of the voice of Inuit and the people who really wanted to speak about things was, you know, really trying to honor those things as well. So my greatest expectation, my greatest hope would be that, you know, the people who helped and collaborated with me on this project are happy with the film, and really happy to see their words go out in this particular way. But also the film is made for Inuit. It's got the Inuktitut subtitles on it as well. So for Inuit in community or outside of community or anywhere, wherever they're living in the world, and maybe for other, you know, Indigenous people or people who have been displaced from places, I think there are, my hope is that there are messages in there that resonate, or that, you know, help people interpret ways of being, and, you know, ways that we can be and do better together on this planet.
I'll just say, I know that all resonated with the programming committee at the very least, so I'm sure it resonated in many other ways. Yes.
I have yeah, kind of exactly what Lindsay was saying. It's the film is collaborative, and but within that you can have your crew that you collaborate with, and it's still possible for projects to go out and force the story that they want to tell. And as like Indigenous filmmakers, we're working in a community beyond just our own filmmaking practice, and to keep that possibility open of what the story really is, or not what the story really is, but what the story you'll be participating in the film that you're working on. And that's been you're always, I mean, in my experience, I'm always, the people will say things that you don't think they're going to say, or they might not answer the question you want answered in my documentary practice. And that's what the story becomes. And I think it's sometimes I think we value that, I value that. The communities that I've been a part of value that. And it's sometimes why in my paid documentary practice I don't bring in possibly non-Indigenous white filmmakers, because I see them want to tell the story they want to tell, and not what the story is being told to them, and working in a collaboration between their own crew, possibly filmmaking collaboration, but also the community that they're in. And that goes beyond when the camera's on or off, all that stuff, how that gets brought into it and needs to be included. And so I think it's always it shifts constantly. And even with it, I think there are stories that I'm told that I experience while I'm making a project that shifted, that will never appear in it, because it's not my place to communicate that story, but it completely changes what the project is. And only possibly me and one other person know that experience. But I see it in a lot of Indigenous filmmakers' work, is that malleability.
Mm-hmm. And Nicola or Neil, would you like to, or Nicola, you just put up your hand, go for it.
Yeah, those thoughts resonate with me. What was just said by Lindsay and Woodrow, and Woodrow was talking, I guess, in essence, about how representation involves a network of relationship that extends beyond the work. So that was a concern at the heart of what I was doing. So for me, it was different because it's not the pandemic that interfered with the process, only with post-production, because for technical matters and questions of aesthetics, because I would usually always screen on a big screen before locking, like color grading and mix and editing and everything. And when I don't have enough budget for it, I do it with the facilities at Concordia University where I teach, and the campus was closed, and I couldn't just rent a pricey theater for that. So, but the footage was shot before everything closed in the winter of 2020. But this commission gone wrong taught me more things about these issues of representation in relationship, because we had to take a stand. I'm not sure in English how you say it, sorry. When something feels wrong and you feel you're on the verge of exploitation, and so that organization hires a Indigenous director for an Indigenous subject, and they think everything is fine, and then you feel you're just the mediator of the exploitation, and that felt very wrong. And on top of that, in between, there's a producer who is Indigenous as well, but I would say an Indigenous capitalist, as there are some, because for him, producing content on Indigenous issues is a market. While I don't want to sound like morally like bragging to be above, but for me, it's a political, cultural, ethical issue. So there was a real clash of things there, and how he was just rushing it through the pipeline. I'm like, what? We have a young woman who's telling us about watching her mom being killed in front of her eyes and having to leave Nunavik. Like, oh, you're making this like advertisement. This is wrong. So then it forces to reconsider my own relationship to the subject, because I can't just tell Olivia after that, let's make another film and I'll make it good. I hope you like it. It has to be like, well, how do you see it? You have to think that it represents you. So it redraws those boundaries in which we are working. And yeah, I was grateful for this opportunity of something gone wrong, leading to redefining relationships that way.
Yeah, I'll go since I'm last. Yeah, this was a whole new process for me. I usually don't do documentaries. I'm more of the narrative side. And so, that was a whole new process, like, how do we do this? And, where do we begin? And and also because this was all going to be on Zoom, right? It's like, how in the world do we make this, fun and engaging, and show a process. And so it was just kind of, really trying to figure things out at the very beginning, and, just kind of going through it, and then, seeing what pieces I could, collect to, put together to fit, and complete that puzzle. So, that was kind of like the biggest adjustment, like for me. Like, everyone that was a part of the process, didn't really know what was going on. They didn't see me, right? And so they didn't, even the people that were, like the producer, the other producer, right, and the audio engineer, and they didn't even know how this was going to turn out, right? So when they saw the final thing, they were, pleasantly surprised. And so, there was a lot of pressure on me to make sure I did this right, to please them and the funders and stuff like that. So yeah, it was an experiment. It was definitely an experiment. And so but I like that. I kind of like challenging myself with each new project. So it was a lot of fun. And I kind of knew how I wanted it to look, right? There were films that I've seen that had a certain way of presenting a story visual or virtually, right? There's certain and so I was like, okay, I'm going to try and make it look like this movie, right? This is kind of the basis for it. And so yeah, that's it.
Great. Yeah, and I mean, we just had some really like frank discussions about ethics of creating work and how the importance of that within your practices. I can see that those are threads with also how you deal with the stories that you tell, and the processes of, I mean, you just discussed some of the processes of how that affects the making of the stories. But I'm wondering also if you can maybe expand a bit on that, since that did come up throughout these conversations, how you, I mean, obviously in these cases that those things came up throughout the process, but how do you enter into a film thinking about your ethics of how you want to make it? Yeah, we'll start with that. And again, we could go maybe in the same order. So Lindsay, you had started, just to make it easy. And if you want to answer, you don't have to.
Sure. I think the ethics of how you enter into a film project are the most important thing about the project. So figuring out if this is your story to tell, and if you are doing it appropriately, with the right kinds of cultural protocols involved, if you are providing space for other people's voices to contribute to it. It's something that I think through in other sort of bigger film projects too, to think about, like, is my nerve or desire or interest in telling this story taking away an opportunity for somebody else to tell the story? And what are the ways in which this story or creating this story adds value to the community that I'm trying to reach? And what are the ways that it potentially does harm? And so, you know, those are things that I think through in absolutely everything that I do, with whatever community I'm working with. So, you know, there were layers and layers of that to this particular project, in the creation of the visuals of it, but particularly in the audio, and in creating respectful dialogues, and ensuring that people's voices were respected and heard and used appropriately. Like, I mean, one of the things about film is that it's an incredibly powerful medium. And so you have an immense power as the creator, as the person holding the camera, or the person, you know, operating the keyboard while you're editing in particular. It's a very, very, you know, violent medium, and it can do a lot of violence to people's stories and people's words. And so thinking through that, and obviously, like, consulting with them, meeting with them, I shared transcripts with people so that they knew exactly which pieces I was going to be sharing, and everybody had to okay what they were sharing. The translations as well were shared with everybody, to make sure there was no kind of mistranslation. So there were like several steps of assurances that people were happy with the way things were going forward. But even then, there's still you know, meaning that you can change when you put one person's words up next to somebody else's words, right? So there's a lot of thinking that has to go into that realm of ethics. And so, you know, those are, I guess, maybe just some thoughts to begin with. There's much deeper conversations to have about that. But maybe I'll start with that. And maybe I didn't even answer your question, but those are the things that I think about when I'm mentoring.
Yeah, I think Lindsay touched on a lot of the really important questions when you start like production, and even when you're in the editing room, exactly like that. I don't really know if I could add much to that, but I'll maybe, like, one of the things that comes up with me and friends is kind of maybe like the ethics, and also like the archive and working through archival documents or photos or footage. And I think there's a constant, I feel like it can go back and forth every time. And I think sometimes I've been on projects where the solution, like the ethical solution for that one, might have applied in another project, and it seemed less ethical for the other project. So it's like these things are always changing, and then it brings up all those other complicated questions of state archives versus tribal archives, or versus family archives, all the different, and then also with that is ownership. So I think, and I think all those things complicate it and don't really give, it's not like, oh, well, this one person has power and controls this archive, and that's not a community-based practice, and so we should utilize, when we have access, we should show what's being hidden or what's being kept from people. But that might not apply to another community or another archive. And when we move through things and gain access and are shown when we're shown new things, it's like we have to reevaluate it every single time, and kind of one decision from another project. Because I think through this stuff with, at times it feels like working through a state archive, you can maybe feel more liberated to freely use, but that's not always the case. And I think there's like easy questions of like, well, is it your community that you're working through, or is it an important story to tell that applied to many people, including your own, like, or for me, my own like personal experiences, and so, or not personal, ancestral experiences. And so that's, again, like these things with these ethics, you have to, there's not a list to check off and work through each time. And so that's kind of like one of the things of like Lindsay was saying, but I'll just add like an archival process as well to that. So.
Yes, I would also say that it is not, ethics is not a form with boxes to check, and also sometimes, and outside the Indigenous context of production, people think when we bring up issues of ethics that it's some kind of strict guideline that they must learn and follow, and that is counter to the freedom of the creative process. And I think the issues of relationships and politics of representation are not an obstacle to artistic expression, not at all. I think that when people don't consider it enough, they overlook things that are there. They overlook layers in the image that they're not considering. They overlook the power of representation because they're not asking these questions. And when you tackle those questions of ethics and relationship, I think it fuels the artistic interest or the meaning of representation. In my film in particular, this was slightly different than usual, because often you're the filmmaker and people offer part of their time and their experience and let you film, and you have a big responsibility in how you handle that. In this case, Olivia and Nancy Saunders, the other protagonist or friend, or Niap, people may know her as the Inuk visual artist Niap, they both did a bit of acting as well, and they're perfectly aware, I would say, of representation. They're kind of in control of what they want to say, how they want to appear, and being natural through that. But they have a high awareness of representation, both politically, personally, artistically. So this was a blessing as well, because the long conversation scene with the two of them at the kitchen table, I just did nothing. I started the camera and they just went on their own, talking about identity and racism and being mixed Inuk in the city and all of that. So this was different. But before, in the past, I myself had like changes, breaks in those concerns. I think I used to be contaminated by this kind of general, how would I say, author ego thing, where it's my thing and I'm going to be respectful, but I hope it works. I hope it's good. I hope people like it. And at some point I did a little gig that was nothing ambitious. It was really just a contract for my community in Wendake, filming elders. And there was a community screening, and people were like talking along with the screen and singing along with the song that was at the end on the credits and cheering. And I realized, oh, that was for them. It wasn't for an abstract audience. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for my CV. It wasn't for where am I at in filmmaking. This was for them. This was an exchange. They gave me something, I gave that back. And that really changed my outlook on that.
I don't want to interrupt. I'm just going to say we only have about 3 minutes left. So Neil, if you want, please feel free to answer there, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that we'll probably be ending as soon as you're done answering.
Okay. Yeah, that won't take too long. So yeah, with this one, I mean, there wasn't really too many ethical issues to, be aware of. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward story, I mean, I guess if there was anything ethical that I had to be aware of, it was just, the whole broader, documentary filmmaking process of, not wanting to, not wanting to interfere too much, and making sure that I'm, like editing as it, most accurately happened, and not trying to kind of, tell a different type of story. There was some acting involved, but again, that was just to kind of address a certain thing that was wanted to be presented in terms of the main character, showing her outside of the virtual landscape. But other than that, yeah, it was just those things. And for me, I like to kind of make, I guess, if there's anything ethical, right, it's just wanting to be as honest as possible. So showing certain moments that maybe other people wouldn't, but I think that it kind of helps bring a human side to the process and to the story and things like that. So I mean, that's kind of it. Yeah. So fortunate for this one, there wasn't too many of those issues to have to try and navigate. So
Wonderful. Well, I just want to personally say thank you, all of you, for these films. They really were important to me. I enjoyed every one of them so much. I learned from them. I felt emotions from them. Joy, learning, etc. They offer so much. But also the programming committee was really, excited to be able to watch this work and bring it to the festival, and to be able to bring them together. So thank you for that. And thank you also for being here today. I'm really grateful for your time. I'm going to just give a little bit of information to the audiences. So a reminder that this program is on the imagineNATIVE Watch platform for 48 hours. You can vote for the Audience Choice Awards, so both feature and short films. That you can do that on the imagineNATIVE website. And if you need help with anything, you can just use the help widget on the website, and someone will be there immediately to give you a hand if you're having problems navigating anything with the festival. So thank you so much again to everyone who joined us and to the filmmakers today, and take care.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and imagineNATIVE, and everyone. Really pleasure to have this discussion with you. Bye.
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 Come on, Ina. Bye.
thank you.